Deconstructing Sufism, the political agenda cloaked as mysticism. Written by Nitin Sawant. Allow me to set the scene for you. You've just woken up from slumber on a cold Monday morning, and a hard day at the office beckons. Slowly but surely, the tranquility and decompression of the weekend gone by exits from your body and soul, leaving you with a typical tight knot at the base of your head that's usually called the Monday dread. And just at this tough moment, your cell phone chimes with a heartwarming message. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. The quote is by the 13th century Sufi poet Rumi, whose mysticism and enlightened-esque maxims have soothed many a tense brow. It has been proudly tattooed on Hollywood heartthrob Brad Pitt's arm. It has even helped Coldplay's Chris Martin recover from his messy divorce, besides resonating with Madonna, Tilda Swinton, and Ivanka Trump. Once you read and process the Rumi quote from your context, the tension in your heart dials down a notch, and you probably forward it to your many social groups good-naturedly, hoping it helps others, too. No wonder Rumi has been the most oft-quoted soothsayer in the West today, with his poetry books featured on practically every bestseller list. And why not? With his status as a pacifistic conciliator in these turbulent times, Rumi comes across as an oracle of harmony. Except that he isn't. The perception is entirely opposite to the reality. What if you found out that most of the Rumi or Sufi homilies that you are so enchanted with are entirely fake and sanitized off all the inherent bigotry prevalent in Islamism? What if you rudely discover that what Rumi wrote and what you read in the West are entirely different philosophies, and that this entire Sufi charade is being put on to pull the wool over your eyes and hide a reactionary, illiberal soul-harvesting doctrine? Welcome to the world of Sufi nonsense, where the very word Suf means wool. Wool as being used in the garments of early Islamist ascetics. Wool is being used to blindside you to their harsh reality. McDonaldization of Rumi, Sufi, and co. Let's revisit our oft-quoted salubrious Rumi homily again. What does the original quote say? According to many Persian translators, the quote is straightforward. Beyond kufr, infidelity, and iman, religion, there is a desert plain. In that middle space our passions rain slash when the Gnostic arrives their hill prostate. Not kufr, not Islam, nor is there any space in that domain. Suddenly the same quote appears less savory now, as the original version makes no mention of right doing or wrongdoing, but is addled with Islamist word salad reeking of a supremacist agenda. The moot question is, how did this fakery ever happen? Decent translations closer to what Rumi intended to portray were always available in the market. But who in their right mind would have fallen for verses of Islamist glorification? Enter Coleman Barks, a frustrated poet who was never entertained by the big publishing houses, so he piggybacked on translations of Rumi without knowing a word of Persian, Islam, or Sufism. He took the available English translations, scrubbed out all the bigotry and provincial references to Islam, and presented a rose-hued Rumi that could appeal to the burgeoning pop philosophy readership in the West. Soon, this repurposed, vacuumed, and deodorized Rumi became a cool enough icon to grace the bookshelves and mindspace of the chic party crowd, and Barks became the New Age Walt Whitman. He minted millions off his version of Rumi, refashioned himself as a Sufi scholar, sold a ton of his hogwash poetry books, gave pompous TED Talks, and even got himself an honorary doctorate from the University of Tehran. It's only now, after the advent of social media, that several Persian scholars are coming forward to contradict Barks and his ruminations and inadvertently reveal the true face of Rumi. It would be interesting to note what Rumi, the great unifier of faiths and pious preacher of universal brotherhood, has to really say. Well, Rumi considered Hindus to be always ugly, black, and of evil omen, and has routinely compared a Hindu with an unclean black dog. Along with Hindus, he had the same disdain for blacks and Jews as well. He composed stanza after stanza on how mirrors would reflect their ugliness, whereas Turks would see their beauty in the reflection. There's more. Rumi saw the whole non-Islamic world as a dark Hindustan that must be destroyed in Turkish style. To the color of the Hindu, what is the difference between soap and black vitriol? Rumi's racism cloaked as universal love is writ large in his Sufi sagas. And in yet another verse steeped in Rumi's so-called love, he has a message for Sufi-loving Indians. Hindus are all asses since they never went abroad and improved themselves. Puke-worthy, right? But before you cancel Rumi and blame it all on Coleman Barks, it might help to look at the very Sufi nonsense that originated in India of the yore and study a few big Sufi names and their modus operandi. The Sufism scam. Simply put, Sufism is supposedly a mystic body of religious practice found within Islam, which has been variously defined as Islamic mysticism, the mystical expression of the Islamic faith, the inward dimension of Islam, the phenomenon of mysticism within Islam, the main manifestation and the most important and central crystallization of mystical practice in Islam, and the interiorization and intensification of Islamic faith and practice. In plain speak, Sufism does come across as the same old Islamism with a bit of song and dance, as Sufis strictly observe Islamic law and belong to various schools of Islamic jurisprudence and theology. The term Sufism was originally introduced into European languages in the 18th century by Orientalist scholars, who viewed it mainly as an intellectual doctrine and literary tradition at variance with what they saw as the sterile monotheism of Islam. It was often mistaken as a universal mysticism in contrast to legalistic Orthodox Islam, although scholars insist that in the medieval period, Sufism and Islam were more or less the same. It supposedly originated in Persia and has spread across India since the 11th century, with various sects like the Chistiya, Naqshbandiya, Qadariya, and Shurawardiya operating in different parts of the country. It would be an interesting exercise to study the key figures of these various orders in India and their brotherly endeavors. Did they really enrich the culture in their sphere of influence and add to the plurality of the existing tradition? Hardly. Kashmir is often touted as the hub of Sufi influence and variously described as the land of the great Sufi Syed al-Hamdani. It's funny, considering Syed al-Hamdani was a Persian and visited Kashmir only a few times in his entire life, and that too for hardly 1 or 2 years each time. This Sufi acted purely as an invader, and the first thing he did after landing in Kashmir was to demolish the Hindu temples to build a khanqa where he offered namaz. He was thoroughly dismayed to discover that the Muslim qazis, theologians, the commoners, and even the rulers in Kashmir were still following their traditional Hindu practices in their daily lives. Sufi Hamdani toiled to enforce Islamic orthodoxy, even to the point of changing how the commoners and the rulers dressed. Although however hard he tried, he could never sell his brand of rigid orthodoxy, and Hamdani eventually ran away from Kashmir in disgust. Then there is the famous Naqshbandi Ahmad Sirhindi, also described as the revivalist of Islam in India, to whom various suborders of the Naqshbandi Sufis trace their spiritual lineage. He is one of the most influential Sufis from the Mughal Emperor Akbar's era, and his letters reveal his fanatical hatred against Hindus, whom he considered dogs. The honor of Islam lies in insulting kuffar and kafirs. One who respects kafirs dishonors the Muslims. He insists in one of his letters. His slogan of how Shariat can be fostered through the sword connotes a clear mindset of Islamic supremacy. He beseeched Akbar to reimpose jizya on Hindus because, for him, the real purpose of jizya was to humiliate and scare kafirs not to dress well or live in grandeur. They should constantly be terrified and trembling. It is intended to hold them in contempt and uphold the honor and might of Islam. He was furious when other tolerant saints preached that Rama, Allah, and Krishna were equal names for God, and threw a fit when he saw commoner Muslims praying to Hindu gods or celebrating Hindu festivals like Diwali, which he described as kuffar and shirk. Yes, so much for the Sufi tolerance and unconditional love. Sirhindi should have been consigned to history's dustbin, but for the pseudo-secular left liberals who ruled India post-independence who glorified and hailed him as a legendary figure. Why? India's first education minister, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, also published his book Tazkira to depict Sirhindi as a Sufi hero who fostered the Muslim national consciousness. All said, it was the Sufis of the Chistian order that did the maximum damage to the psyche of India. Mind you, Chistiya Sufis also acted as the eyes and ears of the Islamic establishment under Nizamuddin Auliya, who sent many of his followers in different directions to wage jihad against the Hindus. Nizamuddin Auliya, in his various sermons, would routinely condemn the Hindus to the fire of hell. The unbelievers at the time of death will experience punishment. He, Allah, has created paradise and hell for believers and the infidels, respectively, to repay the wicked for what they have done. Auliya did not only preach about warring with the unbelievers for jihad, He came to India with his followers to physically engage in it. When Qazi Mughasuddin inquired about the prospect of victory in the Jihad launched in South India under the command of Malik Kafur, the Auliya uttered in effusive confidence, "What is this victory? I am waiting for further victories." The Auliya was also not averse to accepting large gifts sent by Sultan Alauddin from the spoils plundered in jihad expeditions and proudly displayed those at his Kanka lodge. And how does modern India remember this Auliya? Well, even today, this bigot's dargah holds a prime place in the worshipping hotspots of Delhi, and there is a nearby railway junction named in his honor. The biggest name in the Sufi annals remains that of the Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, probably the second prominent Sufi saint of India after Nizamuddin Auliya, who demonstrated a deep-seated hatred towards the Hindu religion and its practices. On his arrival near the Anasagar lake at Ajmer, he saw many idol temples and promised to raze them to the ground with the help of Allah and his Prophet. After settling down there, Khwaja's followers used to bring a cow every day near a famous temple, where the king and Hindus prayed, to slaughter it and cook kebab from its meat, obviously to show his contempt toward Hinduism. Chishti had also come to India with his disciples to fight jihad against the infidels and participated in the treacherous holy war of Sultan Muhammad Gauri, in which the kind and chivalrous Hindu king Prithviraj Chauhan was defeated in Ajmer. In his jihadi zeal, Chishti ascribed the credit for the victory to himself, saying, "We have seized Pithora, Prithviraj, alive and handed him over to the army of Islam." Despite all evidence of the bigotry of the Chistiyas, their clan continues to wage jihad against Hindus unchallenged even today, what with a group of young Chistis from the Kadhim family that tend to the Ajmer Dargah being recently caught for luring, molesting, and blackmailing hundreds of Hindu girls in Ajmer. The real travesty, however, is that despite this being public knowledge, countless Hindus still make the queue to Chisti's Dargah, unaware that the ignominy of his tomb stands on a desecrated ancient Mahadeva temple. Not just the tomb, but in fact, the entire complex is built atop the remains of Hindu and Jain temples demolished by Muslim invaders. Then there is Amir Khusrau, another disciple of Nizamuddin Auliya's, who is lauded as the greatest liberal Sufi poet of medieval India and is allegedly touted to be India's greatest poet, founder of Indian classical music, the creator of Qawwali, Sufi devotional music, and the inventor of the tabla, an Indian drum. Nothing could be further from the truth, though what's true of Khusrau's legacy is the parochialism with which he shows great delight in describing the barbaric slaughter of Hindu captives by Muslim warriors. Describing Khizr Khan's order to massacre 30,000 Hindus in the conquest of Chittor in 1303, he gloated, "Praise be to God, that he so ordered the massacre of all chiefs of Hind out of the pale of Islam, by his infidel smiting swords, in the name of this Khalifa of God, that heterodoxy has no rights in India." He took poetic delight in describing Malik Kafur's destruction of a famous Hindu temple in South India and the grisly slaughter of the Hindus and their priests therein. In describing the slaughter, he wrote, "The heads of Brahmins and idolaters danced from their necks and fell to the ground at their feet, and blood flowed in torrents." Even today, Khusrau's rabid vitriol is immortalized as an ode to universal love and brotherhood, as his composition on the conversion of Hindus, Chop Taluk Sab Chini, Mo Se Naina Malake, is gloriously performed in Bollywood and other assorted musical events. The point is that every single so-called celebrated Sufi saint has been a jingoistic warmonger who cloaked his Islamist tendencies in some wishy-washy mysticism, and it's highly unfortunate that their legends only grew positively over time. Bollywoodification of Sufism. The Sufi nonsense should have been unmasked once India attained freedom and began working on forging its own identity in the world. Unfortunately for India, it was the left liberals who took hold of the media, academia, and cultural complexes in the 50s and 60s, making sure that the emasculation of the Hindu identity continued unabated. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, an Islamist pretending to be a moderate, became India's first education minister, and falsification of India's true history and Sanatani identity began in earnest in a quest to establish a new syncretic secular Ganga Jamuni republic, thereby whitewashing all the black deeds of the Mughals, invaders, and the Sufis. This push for vain syncretism intensified as the left slowly usurped India's filmdom in the 60s, which was highly nationalistic and assertively Sanatani in nature till then. Thus began the era of establishing a new personality for India and Hindus, showing devout Hindus as archvillains while portraying Islamists as benevolent. Film music then evolved as the sharpest tool for whitewashing, and Sufi songs or lyrics with Sufi elements became omnipotent in practically every album. Urdu language and Urdu sharo-shayari, poetry, became the hallmark of Bollywood music, while pure Hindi words and diction were only used in mockery songs or comical situations. In the 80s and 90s, Bollywood was under the throes of the Dawood Ibrahim gang, which operated out of Pakistan. And that made sure that most of the sectarian Paki lyrics made their way into popular Hindi songs. Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan became a big name in the Hindi music industry with his Sufi albums of syncretic Hindu-Muslim love, with lyrics like, "You are Musliman. Don't let kafirs in your homes. They will rob you of your faith." Odes to religious conversion like Khusro's Chap Taluk were beamed on television channels regularly, subconsciously trying to mainstream and rationalize the love jihad activities as Sufism 101. No wonder you keep witnessing viral videos from the Indian state of Kerala even today, where Muslim girls remove the bindi from the foreheads of their Hindu classmates and make them wear the hijab. Why mainstream Sufism at all? The moot question that needs to be asked here is, who benefits from all this fakery and whitewashing? Then again, why not simply enjoy the harmless, sanitized Sufi poetry, as it is so cute anyway? To answer this, we need to understand that this Sufi soft power cloaks a horrible statistic of a demographic change worldwide. If you study the worldwide refugee data, it's evident that Islamic nations form just 23% of the world's population, and yet they generate a massively disproportionate share of the world's refugees. One can attribute the numbers to the eternal strife and war in these nations, but somehow, these numbers are used heavily in countries like India to mask or rationalize their own internal displacement issues. India has always been pressured to accept refugee Rohingyas from Myanmar endlessly, while trivializing their local refugee situation in Kashmir and now West Bengal. This is despite India not being a signatory of the Refugee Convention, 1951, nor the Refugee Protocol, 1967, which obliges them to recognize refugee status. Currently, India is home to diverse groups of refugees, ranging from Buddhist Chakmas from the Chittagong hill tracts of Bangladesh to Bhutanese from Nepal, Muslim Rohingyas from Myanmar, and small populations from Somalia, Sudan, and other sub-Saharan African countries. And yet they are being badgered no end to keep accepting more, particularly the damaging types in Rohingyas. Why? Simply put, a mildly altered demographic powered a local political Bengal outfit, TMC, to a huge electoral win in West Bengal. A new demographic of imported captive Islamist audience is the safest bet in electoral politics for the left. This is exactly why they need to feed India a steady diet of non-stop propaganda of universal love and secular ethos under the Sufi doctrine to soften the Hindu resistance to this demographic disaster. Decades of badgering and belaboring on Sufism are already showing good results for Islamists in the religious conversion business. Take the case of Maulana Kaleem Siddiqui, a well-known Islamic scholar who was recently arrested by the Uttar Pradesh anti-terrorist squad for running the largest conversion syndicate from Muzaffarnagar. Okay, so it's routine for Maulanas to get arrested in Uttar Pradesh, but what stands out in this case is the sheer audacity of Siddiqui and his conversion tactics. This crook converts 15 Hindus daily and has so far converted around 500,000 Hindus to Islam. His modus operandi? Simple. He uses two tools for the poor and unsuspecting: lust for Jannat and fear of hellfire. But his specialty is apparently in seducing upper caste girls, and that too comes easy to him as Hindus are so hungry for love. Even the most fanatic Hindu becomes yours if you give them Savayan, sweets, on Eid. But how can he make it work on such an industrial scale? That's only because after years of Sufi programming, Hindus believe that Ram and Allah are one. This is how your standard-issue Sufism has damaged the social fabric of India. And it's not just about madrasas. The Sufi influence has even changed the dynamic of the Indian mafia and underworld. During the late 80s, Mumbai was racked with underworld killings between the Dawood Ibrahim gang and the rival Pathan gang, headed by Don Karim Lala. It began with Samad Khan, Karim Lala's nephew, killing Dawood's elder brother Shabir, and in successive revenge killings, both families lost 12 of their family members. Several community elders tried to bring both families to a peaceful settlement, but nothing worked till a prominent community scholar, Syed Kumal Ashraf, popularly known as Pir Sahib, got into the picture. He got the warring factions together in the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, made them sit down on its holy ground and commit to a written peace agreement, which has prevailed since then. All of this sounds peaceful till you ponder on the very peace agreement, where a renowned Sufi saint simply stops two Islamist factions from killing each other, but nothing else. Shouldn't the Sufi have impressed upon them the futility of this sinful life of crime? Couldn't he have used his influence to desist both the Dons from indulging in anti-national activities instead of just stopping intra-community fights? Indeed, it's exactly this vainglorious and insular Savayan Sufism that the world needs to stay away from. The only way forward for India and the Hindus is to call out the political and insidious nature of this Sufism industry and go back to studying the timeless principles of Sanatan philosophy. Curiously, it is Maulana Kaleem Siddiqui who has the most logical answer to the conundrum that Hindu society finds itself in. 1 in 10,000 Hindus has seen their book of Vedas in life. There are not 100 Hindus who understand Vedas. The solution clearly lies in going to the basics and educating Indian kids in the value system that has sustained their civilization from Abrahamic hordes for centuries. The battle is lopsided, with Khusro in India and Rumi in America achieving iconic status. But then, it's never too late to wake up, right? After all, as that beautiful fake Rumi quote goes, "If everything around you looks dark, look again. You may be the light."